Are you going to go another year and not have Deshaun get on the field and not do anything? Now, obviously, he couldn't do anything last year. Ocho, he had the Achilles injury. They never activated him. He was, he was scheduled to come, but they didn't bring him off the IR list. But what are you going to do?
Right.
You gonna let him sit on the sidelines again for another $50 million?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think you at least try.
Yeah.
I'm not saying. I don't know. I hate saying never or always, but it's just that I'm not sure that he'll be ever what he was when he was in Houston, and that was the thing, Ocho. That's why you gave up what you gave up. That's why you gave up the compensation, because Ocho, he's 26, not 36. He was 26, but there's no way you could have foreseen. I don't know what they knew or what they didn't know. I mean, everything is speculation. Some say they did, some say they didn't. I don't know what they knew. I don't know what they knew, when they knew, what they, I don't know. All I know, but for that kind of money, Ocho, I got to try to get something.
Yeah.
Why would Shannon Sharpe say the Browns could ruin Shedeur Sanders? That's not hate. That's not trolling. That's experience talking. Because when the conversation turned to Shedeur Sanders possibly landing in Cleveland, Shannon Sharpe didn't hesitate. He shut the idea down fast. Not because Shedeur lacks talent, but because of what Cleveland represents right now: coaching uncertainty, media pressure, front office instability. Sharpe's point was simple but brutal. A young quarterback doesn't fail in the NFL because he can't play. He fails because the environment breaks him. And when you look at Cleveland's recent history with quarterbacks, it's hard to argue. So is this really about Shedeur Sanders? Or is this another example of the Browns forcing a narrative before fixing the foundation? Stay with me, because once you understand why Sharpe drew this line so clearly.
And now your job as an offensive coordinator or head coach, whatever it may be with the Browns, now your job becomes that much more difficult, because you have to do more with less. You know, the pendulum is uneven.
Yeah.
It's uneven. So now you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball, going to a place where, okay, I have to be damn near perfect.
Yeah.
I ain't got
no margin for error.
Yeah, man. No. He don't have the he don't have the pieces over there, It'd be too much. So if Mike McDaniel goes to the Lions, his job is that much easier because of what you have at your disposal.
I agree. I totally agree.
The Browns' entire plan comes into question. Asterisk when Shannon Sharpe addressed the idea of Shedeur Sanders landing in Cleveland. His reaction was immediate and firm. There was no hesitation, no soft phrasing, and no attempt to balance the take. In Sharpe's view, Cleveland represents the kind of environment that can derail a young quarterback before he ever has a chance to establish himself. This wasn't a criticism of Shedeur Sanders' talent. In fact, Sharpe has consistently acknowledged Sanders' ability, confidence, and football intelligence. The concern wasn't about whether Shedeur could play at the NFL level. It was about whether the Browns could provide the structure necessary for him to succeed. Sharpe's argument centered on environment over ability. In today's NFL, quarterback development depends heavily on stability, consistent coaching, a clear offensive identity, and a front office aligned with long-term planning. When those elements are missing or constantly shifting, even elite prospects struggle. Sharpe pointed to Cleveland's recent history as evidence of this pattern. The Browns have cycled through quarterbacks, coordinators, and philosophies at a pace that leaves little room for continuity. Each reset brings a new system, new expectations, and new pressure. For a young quarterback, that constant churn can be overwhelming. That's where Sharpe drew the line. He emphasized that Shedeur Sanders doesn't need a franchise that's still searching for its identity. He needs one that already has it. According to Sharpe, Cleveland is still caught between rebuilding and competing, between patience and urgency. That gray area is dangerous for developing quarterbacks. Another part of Sharpe's concern involved media pressure. Cleveland is a market that amplifies expectations quickly. Every throw, every mistake, every quote becomes part of a broader narrative. For a quarterback with a high profile and a famous last name, that scrutiny multiplies. Sharpe suggested that this environment doesn't allow young players the margin for error they need to grow, instead of development. The focus shifts to reaction. Sharpe also referenced how often quarterbacks in Cleveland are asked to carry the franchise before the foundation is solid. Rather than being eased into leadership, they're expected to be immediate solutions. When that doesn't happen, the blame falls squarely on the player, not the structure around him. This is where Sharpe's warning became clear, putting ShedeurSanders into that situation. In his view, would be setting him up to absorb pressure that should be distributed across coaching, management, and roster construction. When that balance is missing, quarterbacks become the scapegoats for systemic issues. Sharpe's stance wasn't emotional. It was analytical. He framed the Browns as a team still defining its direction. Coaching rumors, front office speculation, and constant debate about leadership. Until those questions are resolved, introducing a franchise quarterback into the mix only adds another variable to an already unstable equation. That's why Sharpe rejected the idea outright to him. Protecting a young quarterback's development means placing him in an environment where expectations are structured, not reactive, where coaching staffs aren't fighting for survival, where leadership is settled enough to absorb losses without panic. Cleveland. In Sharpe's assessment, isn't there yet. This isn't a permanent judgment. It's a snapshot of the present moment. And in that moment, Sharpe believes the Browns would be asking too much of Shedeur Sanders too soon. The takeaway isn't that. Cleveland can't develop a quarterback. It's that timing and environment matter as much as talent. And until those pieces align, Sharpe's message is clear. Putting Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland right now would be a risk, not for the franchise. But for the quarterback himself, when the conversation shifted from Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland to who would be responsible for developing him, Shannon Sharpe's position became even clearer. The idea of pairing Sanders with Mike McDaniel, a name that surfaced quickly in speculation, was something Sharpe dismissed without hesitation. Not because McDaniel lacks offensive creativity or intelligence, but because fit matters more than reputation. Sharpe's concern centered on the reality that Cleveland does not currently offer a settled coaching environment. Any discussion about pairing a young quarterback with a specific coach assumes stability, something Sharpe argues the Browns have yet to establish. In his view, Mike McDaniel represents a system-driven coach who thrives in an organization built around continuity. His success has been tied to clear offensive identity, front office alignment, and patience from ownership. Dropping that model into a franchise still navigating internal uncertainty creates friction. Rather than growth, Sharpe framed it as a mismatch of timing. A young quarterback entering the league needs a coach whose role is secure, whose philosophy won't shift with every disappointing stretch, and whose authority isn't questioned weekly. In Cleveland, coaching speculation has become routine. Even productive seasons are followed by debate. That environment creates pressure that spills directly onto the quarterback. Sharpe argued that expecting Mike McDaniel to walk into that dynamic and immediately stabilize it, while also developing a high-profile rookie, is unrealistic. Another layer of Sharpe's argument focused on accountability in stable organizations. Coaching decisions are insulated from weekly emotional swings. Losses don't trigger panic. Development is allowed to play out. In unstable ones, quarterbacks become the focal point for frustration, and coaches are forced to adapt their approach just to survive. That's where Sharpe sees the danger, pairing Shedeur Sanders with a coach whose own job security could become part of the weekly conversation places both in a defensive position. Instead of building, they'd be managing optics. Instead of developing, they'd be answering narratives. Sharpe also highlighted the Browns' recent tendency to chase solutions rather than establish systems. Attaching high-profile names to unresolved structural issues creates short-term excitement but long-term confusion. In that context, the McDaniel-Sanders idea becomes another headline rather than a plan. The media reaction, according to Sharpe, plays a major role in this cycle. Speculation turns into expectation. Expectation turns into pressure. And pressure accelerates timelines that shouldn't be rushed. For a young quarterback, that acceleration can be damaging. Sharpe made it clear that elite development requires protection, not just physically, but psychologically. Coaches must have room to coach. Quarterbacks must have space to fail quietly. Cleveland's current environment doesn't offer that margin. That's why Sharpe rejected the pairing outright. He wasn't dismissing Mike McDaniel's ability. He was questioning whether Cleveland is positioned to support his style of leadership while also nurturing a rookie quarterback with a national attention. In Sharpe's assessment, the Browns are still figuring out who they are. Introducing a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders into that uncertainty, even with a respected coach, multiplies the risk rather than reducing it. The message was consistent with his earlier point. Talent doesn't overcome instability. until Cleveland defines its direction clearly: coaching authority, front office alignment, and development philosophy. Pairing a young quarterback with any coach becomes a gamble. And from Sharpe's perspective, ShedeurSanders shouldn't be the one paying that price. As Shannon Sharpe wrapped his stance on ShedeurSanders in Cleveland, the final layer of his argument focused less on football schemes and more on narratives. Specifically, how media agendas and franchise history can quietly shape a quarterback's fate before he ever takes a snap. Sharpe pointed out that Cleveland is uniquely vulnerable to this cycle. Every quarterback conversation in Cleveland carries the weight of the past. Names change, systems change, but the expectations remain heavy. When a new quarterback arrives, he isn't just evaluated on performance. He's compared against every previous failure. That comparison accelerates judgment and narrows patience. For a player like Shedeur Sanders, that context matters. Sharpe emphasized that Sanders enters the league with visibility few rookies have. His confidence, leadership, and last name guarantee attention from day one. In the right environment, that spotlight can be empowering. In the wrong one, it becomes suffocating. Cleveland, in Sharpe's view, turns spotlight into pressure quickly. Media speculation doesn't stay hypothetical for long. It turns into weekly storylines, social media debates, and constant questioning of direction. Once that machine starts, it's difficult for a young quarterback to grow without being pulled into the narrative. Sharpe argued that this isn't about blaming the Browns. It's about recognizing patterns. Quarterbacks in Cleveland often become symbols of hope before the infrastructure is ready to support them. When results don't come immediately, blame shifts away from structural issues and lands on the player. That cycle erodes confidence and forces development to happen under scrutiny. This is why Sharpe believes media-driven agendas are just as dangerous as poor coaching fits. Once a quarterback is framed as a savior, patience disappears. Every incomplete pass becomes a referendum. Every loss becomes personal. Development turns reactive instead of deliberate. Sharpe contrasted that with what Shedeur Sanders actually needs. Not hype, not headlines, but insulation. He needs a franchise that allows growth without panic. A coaching staff secure enough to withstand losing streaks. A front office aligned enough to absorb criticism without redirecting it toward the quarterback. Sharpe made it clear that this doesn't mean Cleveland can never be that place. It means they aren't there right now. Timing is everything in quarterback development. Sharpe also addressed the idea that talent alone can override environment. History, he argued, proves otherwise. The league is full of gifted quarterbacks whose careers stalled because they were placed into unstable situations. Talent didn't save them. Structure would have. For Sanders, Sharpe believes the goal should be sustainability, not survival. He framed the Browns conversation as a cautionary example of how franchises can unintentionally accelerate a young player's timeline by chasing answers instead of building foundations. When that happens, quarterbacks are asked to be leaders before they're learners, and that's where careers go sideways. Sharpe's warning wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. He wasn't attacking Cleveland. He wasn't dismissing Shedeur Sanders. He was highlighting the gap between potential and preparation. Until Cleveland closes that gap through stability, clarity, and alignment, any conversation about drafting or developing a franchise quarterback remains incomplete. That's why Sharpe drew his line, not because Shedeur Sanders can't succeed, but because success requires more than opportunity. It requires protection from chaos. And until that protection exists, Sharpe believes the smartest move is patience.